Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriela Zanfir-Fortuna. I am Senior Counsel for the Future of Privacy Forum, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. And my colleague?
Hi, I'm Limor Magazanik, and I'm a colleague of Gabriela. I manage the Israel Tech Policy Institute, an affiliate of the Future of Privacy Forum based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And we're here today to discuss with you about digital transformation and trust. And it feels so to the point that we're doing this while Gabriela is in the United States, I'm in Tel Aviv, and we're experiencing and living the digital transformation throughout.
We will walk you through the summary of our presentation today. And I will yet again give the floor to Limor for the first 2 points.
Yeah. So firstly, we will discuss how innovation and digital transformation are challenging the traditional relationships between data-driven organizations, which are most all organizations nowadays, both governmental ones and corporate private sector ones. Everyone is dealing with data and processing vast amounts of personal data, and have relationships with their clients, customers, and employees, and required to take note of how to protect those people's data. And then we will talk about why trust and data governance are so essential for everyone to be able to enjoy the benefits of a digital transformation and also be wary of the risks and potential challenges.
And then for the second part of our talk today, we want to explore a bit how can organizations build trust. And again, we'll be talking about data-driven organizations. And from our experience, one of the most successful strategies for this is to actually build trust from within and have dedicated individuals that work for the organization and that are data protection masters. So one answer for this would be that trust can be built from within, for example, by appointing a data protection officer and by giving that data protection officer the necessary resources and the necessary powers and the trust to actually drive the digital transformation and the data protection part of it, of course. And then we will also talk a bit about the fact that while the data protection officer is a legal obligation under the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union, with which you might be familiar with, in fact, now countries around the world are starting to actually see the value of having such an individual within organizations. And we are seeing legislation around the world, including obligations to appoint data protection officers or including incentives to appoint data protection officers. And we are going to look a bit on the map and see where is this happening. And then at the very end, because we don't have any chance to interact with you and go through a questions and answers session, instead of conclusions, Limor and I are going to discuss some of the most common questions that we hear about data protection officers and their roles in data-driven companies. So, Limor.
Yeah. So I'll start with maybe a more overarching view of our technology environment, our digital environment, data issues, data governance, requirements to protect people's rights and interests when you deal with personal data have been around for quite a few years. At least 30, 35 years in the past. But in recent years, most of you have heard something about this space, this ecosystem that has grown and has gotten more complicated around the world. And Gabriela is an expert on many of the countries who are now having evolving regulations on data protection. And almost every organization that you can think about, whether it's a bank, an insurance company, a hospital, your lawyer's firm, a consulting firm, a supermarket chain. Everyone is processing personal data of individuals. And this is not something new in our computerized environment, but it has certainly become a lot more prominent and a lot more dramatic in the past few years. And now, when we're experiencing this pandemic, who's made us stay at home and do a lot more of our day to day activities in a digital online fashion, these processes are even more and more extreme. And in this space, both we as consumers, as customers, as people who engage and interact with companies, with organizations for services, for products, or also as employees of companies who are engaging with our employers, all expect, whether we think about it or not, expect respect for our personal rights and freedoms and for our personal information. And this is also true, and maybe even doubly so, in the interaction between the government and public administration and citizens. A lot of personal data of all sorts and kinds is being managed there. And people have come to expect in many places and in many interactions that the right to privacy protection will be honored and respected. And this is something that organizations can use in order to supplement and enhance and build a better relationship with their customers, with their citizens, to build a system of trust where people are comfortable engaging digitally, engaging online, because they know that their data, personal data, and their well being will be protected from harm. And this entails both issues that are a part of the privacy principles, but also issues of cybersecurity and data security that you probably all have heard of data breach incidents, cybersecurity attacks, hackers in this space. And the risks are growing and escalating. And this requires organizations to be a lot more diligent about the protection that they provide to people's data. And another thing worth understanding or maybe highlighting is that since we are much more engaged online in many of the things we do, our interactions leave a larger and larger digital footprint. So each organization that interacts with people collects and processes a lot more information, and with the current digital tools is able to produce inferences and insights and even more data about those individuals. So our responsibility as custodians of people's data is growing since we are collecting more data about people. Gabriela, if you can move to the next slide, please. And I would maybe emphasize a few points that are a part of the influence of the current and more speedy digital transformation. One of the examples we can see is that some organizations have all of a sudden experienced huge growth in the number of users. For example, video and online communication software all of a sudden grew from an X number of users to 100, 1,000 X number of users. This creates all of a sudden like a huge group of people who are testing you daily and hourly and finding all the ways where your software or your organization's practices may be exposing people's personal data to harms or to misuse. So this growth in the number of customers, which is blessed and wonderful, and may bring a lot of benefits, and it's definitely beneficial to all of us who are stuck at home, locked down at home, and want to continue interacting with friends, family, employers, and businesses. But at the same time, it's worth remembering that the bar of the risk has been raised. there are more interfaces and more connectivity in this world, since some of the people used to still maybe go to the bank or go to the government office in order to take care of their business. But now a lot more people are doing things online. A lot of many organizations have created fast interfaces in order to connect with all those peoples and supply the demand for services. This creates a lot more risk and potential errors. There are new automated consumer tools for example, the data protection regulations in many places allow for people to ask to delete data about themselves that organizations hold. Some companies or startups have created very easy tools to use, where you as a consumer can automatically basically send out 100 requests for either access or deletion to various organizations, and they should be prepared to answer you. And this is something that has grown quite considerably in the past year. Everything we do in the online sphere is identified, much more so than before. If before I could have gone into the supermarket anonymously, buy whatever I want, pay even in cash, and then leave, and no one would know what my purchases are. Now, when I'm sending out for takeaway and for the supermarket to be sending me all of my produce and groceries, there's a digital footprint that includes all of my shopping in a very identified way, and very strong identification for that matter. And the same goes for all of the other services. And the public is much more aware of all of this, and is also much more aware of their rights, and is expecting organizations to create the processes in order to protect those rights, and in order to build this interface and this connection and this relationship with consumers and citizens in a trustworthy way. So I'll now turn it over to Gabriela, who will help us understand how to tackle this from within the organization.
Thank you so much, Limor. That was really such a great overview about what's happening. And it's, as I was saying at the beginning, how can we deal with this type of digital transformation, and how can we deal as organizations with this influx of personal data, and the influx of a lot of new regulation that's also coming to how that's influencing how you deal with all of these amounts of data. And one of the answers to all of this is to appoint a data protection officer. A data protection officer is an independent internal advisor on all matters related to the collection, use, storing, sharing, publishing, or in any other way processing the personal data incoming into your organization. And this data protection officer is supposed to report to the highest management level. Now, in the European Union, the data protection officer, the DPO, has a protected legal status under the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. And this is because the GDPR actually imposes as an obligation to the biggest companies, or to companies that actually process high level of personal data, of sensitive data, the obligation to appoint a DPO. The DPO acts as a liaison between the organization and the individuals whose personal data is processed. The DPO is also a liaison between the organization and the public, and between the organization and the regulators that are tasked with enforcing the law, and also, with other authorities that may ask access to the personal data held by the organization. Now, I was mentioning that here in Europe, we actually have a legal obligation to appoint a DPO. All public bodies have the obligation to appoint a data protection officer, and this includes your public schools, this includes public hospitals, municipalities, ministries, and so on. But then private organizations that systematically monitor individuals on a large scale as part of their core business, or private organizations that process sensitive data on a large scale are also under an obligation to appoint one. Now, what we've seen as a best practice promoted by regulators to increase accountability of organizations is to actually appoint a data protection officer, even if there is not a legal obligation to do so. But the complexity of data flows of the current market and the current world actually would benefit from having such an individual working within organizations. So some organizations choose to appoint a DPO to increase accountability and trust. As I was mentioning, the role of the DPO as a liaison between the organization and the public, this is where trust has the space to grow, because the public, the customers, the users of a company, they will actually have a point of contact. They will have someone to reach out to and to ask about what is happening to their data, and they will have someone to actually reply to their requests. Limor was mentioning earlier that there are now not only that there are rights of individuals to ask for copies of their data, to ask for erasure of their data, and so on, but there are now even mechanisms on the market to allow individuals to actually send streamlined requests like that, or to allow groups of individuals to send their requests. And having a DPO that actually can deal with these types of requests actually increases consumers and users' trust in the company's process. But the role of the DPO is so much more profound than just interacting about these matters with the users and the public. What does a DPO do? Well, the DPO also raises awareness of data protection rules within the organization. And this is very important because this role means that all of the new regulations, all of the risks that are attached to processing personal data, and all of the smart ways to deal with that in a way that enhances, again, trust and enhances protection of the rights of individuals will be actually known throughout all of the departments and all of the work streams of an organization. And the DPO also becomes a point of contact within a group, within a company, to explain what's happening in the data world. And then the DPO can also provide training for the organization. The DPO advises on new projects, on new campaigns, new tools, including website functionalities that involve collection or use of personal data, because the DPO is supposed to be a person that's specializing in data protection, and it is an expert voice in this matter. Then the DPO also proposes data protection and privacy by design solutions and strategies to be embedded in existing processes, but also in new projects. The DPO will also support compliance with data protection law, so we'll work with the legal team, with the general counsel, or the legal officers to ensure that compliance is achieved with all of these new obligations. Then the DPO communicates with customers, clients, prospects, users, and so on. And I already explored that when I was referring to the previous slide. And then very importantly, the DPO is a point of contact for data protection authorities. And the DPO is really a trusted voice when it comes to how data protection authorities interact with companies, because the DPO can explain the processes, can explain the thinking that went behind how data is used for a specific purpose in the company or for a specific product and so on. As I was meant, yes?
No, sorry, no. I was just wondering when to jump in with maybe a couple of questions, but just to make sure that you finish with the next slide.
Yes, very, very briefly, the next slide. I was saying that the DPOs are going global. So we already talked about the GDPR and how it mandates a data protection officer in the European Union, but this is happening around the world. For example, in Singapore, already in a law from 2012, we've seen the introduction of the role of the data protection officer, and this role is growing in importance over there too. In Brazil, the general data protection law was adopted a couple of years back. It entered into force last year, and now there is an obligation to appoint data protection officers. The Israeli law has a similar obligation. The law in South Africa, which becomes applicable and enters into force 1st of July this year, has this type of role provided as an obligation too. And then there are laws in the works. We have a law in India, a law in China, a law in Canada that are, well, they are draft laws, right? They are bills. And all of them actually have either a data protection officer or something called a person responsible for personal information protection, or a designated individual within the organization to actually perform all of these tasks. And this is where we get to exchange some ideas, Limor.
Thank you, Gabriela. That was wonderful in such a short time to go over this very complicated role with all of its intricacies. For the sake of everyone who's listening to us, let's discuss for a minute what are the main challenges of this role of the DPO that it's becoming a standard, a golden standard that organizations are expected to appoint.
Yes. So what are some of the common challenges, right? Some of the common challenges that DPOs face, the ones that I hear about the most is that they are not actually given enough weight for their advice, right? Or that they are not involved from the early stages of designing a product or designing a process by the organization, and they are perhaps involved at the very end when their advice is not as useful. Because let's say you want to create a new functionality on your mobile app, and if you start doing that by just following market forces, let's say, without actually asking yourself whether the new data that you want to collect is actually necessary for that new functionality, whether you can do that in a more privacy-friendly way, you might create unnecessary risk for the organization at the end of the process. And if the DPO is not involved from the very beginning of this process, it's nobody wins from that.
That's true. Yeah, I would maybe pick up on that and add that I see this role as maybe similar to an internal auditor sometimes in an organization. And that is something that people usually are not very happy with, to have someone be sort of an internal inspector in their organization. And from what I hear, many of the challenges may be in the fact that people don't even share new projects, new products, or information about what's going on in the organization in terms of data governance in a timely manner with a data protection officer, and then it's very hard for her to do her job. So I would say that maybe our listeners think while they're doing their roles in either marketing, R&D, product design, think when you should be approaching your DPO, your data protection officer, and sharing with her that you're doing a new project that has to do with personal data, and it's worth getting the expert advice of someone within your organization, who is there or and is familiar with what you're doing, with your goals, with your market, with your processes of work in the organization, instead of maybe somewhere along the road getting a visit from a regulator, from a data protection authority, and that'll be quite a different matter. So hopefully people will see the data protection officer as someone who is helping the organizations to build the trust that is really required, as we were saying before, in this time of digital transformation.
Absolutely. And, I was wondering, Limor, what are other roles that you are seeing within companies that build trust except for the DPO? You are interacting with a lot of companies, and I'm wondering just what's what else is happening out there.
So sometimes it's communication. It's those parts of the organizations who are responsible for communicating with consumers, with customers, with citizens. And when they, in their manner and content of communication, are transparent to people, it's a better way to meet people's expectations of that organization in terms of building trust. And for those people who are not necessarily privacy professionals, not necessarily experts in data protection, it makes sense to work together with the data protection officer in order to build the message to the consumers, to the public, in a way that supports a trusted relationship.
Indeed. And I think we've also been seeing new roles such as trust officers, right? Mm-hmm.
Ethics officers, and and corporate responsibility officers, and absolutely.
Yeah. I think we only have literally 1 minute or two, and I will just leave this last brief intervention to you. How can the work of a DPO be supported, right? Because the DPO success is the organization's success.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that the first thing is to acknowledge that's a role that an organization really needs in order to support good business, and to give those officers both the resources, the physical resource that they require, and also the status in the organizations that allow them to reach out. They have a mandate to connect with all business units and motivate everyone and create awareness throughout the organizations and its employees to the importance of privacy protection and to the requirements of privacy protection. I think that is the main thing, that if higher management is backing the data protection officer, that's a key to success.
And we will leave it at that, because that was the perfect ending to this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all, and be well.